Hi everyone, Steve here again with another edition of the DUBSTAR Archive question and answer sessions. So, straight in. Sean McKinley says, "Hi Steve, I have around 100 ideas for songs recorded over the years, but I struggle to finish them with lyrics being the hardest thing. Any advice? And have you ever had writer's block through the years?" This is the sort of thing that I talk about a lot on the songwriting degree courses that I have written and sometimes lecture. So I think the number one piece of advice I would give probably isn't directly helpful for you, Sean, but I'll say it anyway. I interviewed one of my heroes about 20 years ago, a man called John Fox, and he gave a piece of advice for me and the readers which has stuck with me ever since, which is simply this: work as quickly as you possibly can. And the way I understand what he meant was that the quicker you work, the more likely you are to get creative ideas out before your critical facilities in your brain step in and start assessing whether what you're doing is good or not. So what I try to do these days is to allocate about 20 minutes of writing per song, because I know that if it's taking longer than 20 minutes, what I'm working on is not coming. It's not coming naturally, and it often will end up sounding contrived, forced, that kind of thing. So work as quickly as you can. However, that doesn't really help you if you've already spent 5 hours on something and you just can't complete a tune. I think, and this might seem a little bit unhelpful or maybe even controversial, but what I would suggest is stop. Walk away. The fact that you've already put that amount of time into the song and it's not finished implies to me that you're already unhappy with the song. So there's a really good chance that you're actually never going to be happy with the song. So put it to one side and start again, and start under a different regime, which is where you're working as fast as you can and you've allocated a specific amount of time to get a completed song written. In terms of lyrics, I find that the kiss of death for a song, and you can hear it in so many songs, modern songs, and older songs as well, is when you leave the lyric to last. So lyric writing becomes a piece of homework. No, that's not the approach. All the best songs that I've written, let's say for Dubstar, they've always started with a lyrical idea in mind. Sometimes a completed lyric, but if not a completed lyric, at least a direction for the lyrics. What am I trying to convey? So if you're finding that your lyric writing is happening as the last part of the process, well, the implication to me is that you're delaying doing that. Maybe because you don't actually have anything to say. Well, the solution is to only write when you actually have something to say. Key thing there, of course, is to have lots of things to say. And that's a really big topic, which maybe requires a degree course to kind of get into properly. In terms of writer's block, again, this is a very big topic. I have experienced writer's block, and the way that I've got out of it is to write as often as I can with no purpose. So I'm not trying to write a single, I'm not trying to write an album, I'm not trying to write a commercial or write for anybody else. I'm just writing because I enjoy writing. And that can include stupid songs, it can be pastiches, it could be funny songs, that kind of thing. But the idea is that I'm enjoying the process and trying to just create something new. I leave all of the critique of the work for another time. What that means is that when I actually really do have something important that I want to convey, then I'm match fit, so to speak. The other possibility is that if there's some sort of deadline that I need to hit, look at a whole backlog of songs that I could actually deploy in that situation. Backlog's not the right word. Let's say repertoire. I think that's a bit more positive. So it's a question of just being as active creatively as you possibly can and not to be hard on yourself. As I said, I could talk about this topic all day long. What I tend to find is people who are experiencing writer's block, it's not that they've got a crisis of creativity. It's often that there's something else that's going on in their life, or it's their relationship with themselves, which is getting in the way of them being happy with anything that they're creating artistically or musically. And that's a big topic. But there are various things that we can do. And the best one is to keep creatively active. Okay, a question from Matt Lane. He says, question for me. Why did the song Goodbye not close the album Goodbye? This sort of thing intrigues me from an artist perspective as an album listener. Matt, it's a great question. So basically, the song, which was originally entitled Goodbye to You, was recorded for Disgraceful. And I explained on a blog post a while ago that the reason why the song was dropped from Disgraceful was that I made a kind of silly mistake of informing the record company that there was a big sample running all the way through that tune from an act called Funk Dubious. And we hadn't cleared that sample. And so the song was taken off the album, and there it is. So because it had been recorded for Disgraceful, it just wasn't really part of the selection of songs that could have gone onto the second album. It was essentially forgotten. So when we came to record the B-sides for No More Talk, I felt like it was a good opportunity to bring this song out again, rather than writing another new song. You have to bear in mind that by the time that Goodbye was completed, I'd written just so many songs, and frankly, I didn't have anything further to say. So it was easier to revisit an old song and include that. Now, as you've sort of pointed out, it does seem a bit odd that you've got a song called Goodbye that's not on the album Goodbye. Something to bear in mind is that the second DUBSTAR album wasn't entitled Goodbye until the very end of the writing and recording process. In fact, again, as I've mentioned in the blogs, the provisional title for the DUBSTAR album, second album, was Death is the End, which was a kind of, dark humour thing that was sort of going around between the three of us, maybe four of us with Paul as well, at the time. So whilst all this great stuff was going on, there were times where each of us was freaking out at certain points and often reflecting on our own mortality. It's just one of those things. So obviously the record company weren't going to release an album called Death is the End. We had to rename the album. And so keeping with this sort of gallows humor idea, saying goodbye, having just had all this success, seemed to be quite amusing, I suppose. And also kind of reflected a lot of what's going on in the lyrics of the album. So the idea of calling the album Goodbye, it kind of fitted, but it really wasn't a reference to this older song. And so that's why it wasn't included on the album. So Brad Peterson from Ogden, Utah asks, were there any release songs that you felt weren't complete? Songs you wished you could have had another iteration or two over to improve? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's an interesting question that you posed there, because you've asked whether I felt they were complete or not, which I suppose is a little bit different to asking whether they could have been improved. So, thinking of Disgraceful, I think there's really nothing on that album that I feel was incomplete or I would have significantly changed or improved. Not that keen on the version of Not Once, Not Ever, but I do think it works, and it's very easy to go back and just think, oh, you could have changed that, maybe change the mix, change that line in the lyric. But I do think the Disgraceful overall is a completed body of work. Having said that, don't like the version of Elevator Song that's on the album, and I really do prefer the acoustic version that happened a bit later. I feel a little bit that Elevator was a victim for having been around for a very long time, and with there being so many different versions of it, and the latest one version of it being a kind of reggae thing, as you can hear on the album, it fitted with what we were doing with Stars and Disgraceful, the song, and that kind of thing. So we sort of went with that version of the song. I think it would have been better as a ballad. On Goodbye, no, I don't think anything there is really incomplete. I do think that The View From Here, that there would have been another version of The View From Here that could have been a superb single. And I think I've mentioned before that The View From Here was considered to be a single, but it never happened. So I think that could be improved, but incomplete, no, I don't know. When we're talking about incomplete Dubstar songs, it has to be when we get to Make It Better. I feel like there was a missing step in the completion of that album, and that was that there really wasn't a production process that there had been with that album. There had been with previous albums with Stephen Hague. There wasn't one for that album. Much of it was produced by me, obviously with help from Chris and Sarah, and also with Spike Mike Drake. But the thing is, I didn't realise it at the time, but I definitely think it now, that it's very difficult for you to be the writer, the programmer, the arranger of a song, and also the producer, because I work on something for so long that maybe you lose perspective on what should be happening in these songs, also whether or not the song is good enough. So, recordings on Make It Better that I think are incomplete. I really like When the World Knows Your Name. I think that's a really good song. But I feel like the version that's on Make It Better just doesn't do it any justice, which is why when you listen to the best of Dubstar that's on Spotify, you'll hear that the demo version is included there rather than the Make It Better version. I think that there is still, or there would have been, a much better version of that song. In terms of the United States of Being stuff, no, I think that stuff is complete. In terms of the B-sides, I think that there could have been a better version of song number 9. Now, I love it as it stands, but I feel that the mix and the production was wrong. Basically, it's the mix is wrong. Sarah sings it brilliantly. Chris's guitar player is really good. I think the arrangement kind of works as well, but I think it could have been it could have sounded a lot better. But again, that's an improvement rather than something being incomplete. I also really like This Is My Home, which was the one of the B-sides for the song for the single Cathedral Park. I think that song could have been fleshed out a bit. I know that when I was putting the arrangement together, I was going for a kind of jungle, sort of drum and bass kind of feel. I don't really know why. I think I just thought that would be something to do. And I think maybe something a bit more melodic and strident rather than manic would have been better there. Okay, next. So Assad Habib from Lebanon asks, and my apologies, Assad, if I've pronounced your name badly there. He asks, what are the worst Dubstar songs you wish you've never released on any album? Good Lord. Okay, I don't have a problem with anything that's on Disgraceful, although I would have put on a different version of Elevator Song. I don't think there's any particularly bad song on that album. On Goodbye, I think Goodbye has way too many songs on it. I think we could have dropped about 5 of those songs and had a better album. So I wished that we had never recorded the song It's Over. I think it's too bleak. I think it would have made an interesting bonus track, but I think it shouldn't have been on there at all. I think I'm not happy with the version of It's Clear that ended up on Goodbye. I think that could be removed as well. And I think when you say goodbye, I think it's got a really nice feel to it. Musically, I think it's fine. Lyrically, though, no. I think that song should never have been recorded, or at least it should never have been recorded like that. On Make It Better, oh man, I don't know. I think Arc of Fire is... It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous song, and actually it sounded much better as an instrumental, which is not a comment on Sarah. It's just it just doesn't really suit singing. I think I also would remove Mercury, not because I do think Mercury is a good song, and I think we kind of did it justice. Sort of. No, in the end, it sounds a lot. It just sounds like a mistake to me. So those, I think, are the worst songs from the albums. It's really strange to talk in these terms. And in terms of the B-sides that were released, I wouldn't have, in retrospect, I wouldn't have released Starfish, largely because it's just another ridiculous song. It sounds kind of interesting, but, lyrically, it's crazy. So Assad also asks, if I were to introduce a friend to Dubstar's music, what tracks would you recommend me to use? Well, I think we could start with Stars, and then I think we could include Manic and The Day I'd See You Again, and then I think we could include Ghost and When the World Knows Your Name. And then I think really from the B-sides, I would go with song number 9 and I Lost a Friend. I think that gives you a good breadth of sonic breadth of what Dubstar was, and it also gives you kind of a lyrical indication of the characters involved. So I would choose those ones. And a final question from Assad is, there were B-sides that were much stronger than some album tracks that made it to the final track listing. Whose choice was it, the band or Food? Some choices were ill-advised. What it came down to was many of the songs that ended up on the B-side were written in a separate writing process to the writing process that was used for the songs that ended up on the albums. So they're much more relaxed, but it also meant that they appeared after the A&R process for the choice of songs for the album had been completed. So, as I've mentioned on the blogs, there were instances where Andy Ross, who was our man at Food Records, had wanted to include some of the songs that were recorded as B-sides for future Dubstar albums. And I said I wasn't very keen on that, but I do appreciate where he was coming from. The reason why I wasn't keen was that my motivation, I suppose, was just to write as much music as I can, thinking that I could just turn out another song as good as song number 9 or The View From Here or whatever. So that's basically what happened. These songs appeared after the process for choosing what was going on an album had completed. Right, so Michael Rosser asks, Dubstar has a distinctive sound that is seemingly unlike any other act out there before or since. Well, thank you, Michael. That's very kind. What is it that differentiates a Dubstar song sonically that makes your songs so unique? I struggle a little bit to answer this, but I do have a few ideas for what was the Dubstar sound. And number one, what I think it is, I know this isn't sonically, but this is ultimately kind of a writing question. I think the number one thing is that you have emotional and emotive songs written by a man, sung by a woman. That is, it's obviously not unique, but I think that it was something that was quite different, particularly in the 90s. And it's also particularly different because Sarah's singing style was very kind of dispassionate. It's something you hear a lot these days with people like Phoebe Bridgers. I hope I got her name right there. For example, she does this as well. So she sings these really emotional songs, but they're quite understated and withdrawn. I think that was a Dubstar thing, and I think that really ultimately comes down to Sarah. The other thing is that almost all of the songs and all of the big songs from Dubstar were written as ballads, which were then sort of not sped up, but kind of made more rhythmical through the arrangements and the programming. And in many ways, it's similar to Depeche Mode. If you listen to many of the songs that those guys put out in the 80s and 90s, you can hear there's this kind of similar process. And in the many of the big songs are ballads that have been bolstered by bombastic production and arrangements, largely from Alan Wilder. It's a similar kind of thing with Dubstar. So, for example, if you listen to Stars, that is a song that can be performed in a whole variety of different ways. But Stars was originally a ballad on the piano. You can probably imagine that. So that idea of taking a slow song and making it faster, I suppose, I think is another thing that really contributed to the Dubstar sound. And I think it was quite unusual for acts that emerged from the 90s to write slow songs then that became dance floor songs. One final thought: we weren't Britpop, we weren't electropop, we weren't trip hop. We were sort of like an amalgamation of all these different things, and just done in a kind of, how can I put it, naive way. We weren't particularly self-conscious about what we were doing in terms of style. So you had lots of samples that would be something that you would find in hip-hop or trip-hop. You'd have Chris's guitar playing, which was something you'd find a lot in the sort of alternative music from the 80s and 90s, of course. Then you'd have my sort of lyrics, which were influenced by people like Morrissey and Aznavour and Billy Bragg and those kind of people. It was just a really strange combination, which kind of makes Dubstar difficult to pigeonhole. So Michael also asks, this is perhaps too personal to cover, but I wonder why you were too miserable by the end of the Lexington gig. It is genuinely one of the most memorable shows, having wanted to see Dubstar perform live since the mid-90s, and that crowd loved every moment for what it's worth. Thanks, Michael. Again, that's very kind. There are a few reasons, and here's the first. I don't get stage fright. I have been getting up on stage and doing my thing since about the age of 14. I don't have a problem with getting in front of people and talking. This is, I suppose, a manifestation of that. I also don't have a problem, playing gigs and doing comeback things or even playing in other people's bands because I don't get stage fright. But I do sometimes internalize the pressure that there is on doing a good job for me, and that comes out after the show as opposed to with nerves prior to the show. There's a phrase from one of my favourite, if not my favourite ever, comedy shows called The Thick of It, where some character was referred to as a post-match puker, So all those nerves that people often have before getting on stage, I don't have that. But sometimes it's expressed after the show. It was like nothing had gone wrong. Everything had been a success and everyone around me was having a great time. But I just had to go home. I think it was just all the pressure had evaporated having played the show, and I was kind of left with the nerves that in other circumstances that somebody else would have been feeling prior to the show. So there's that. Answer number 2 was that I know it sounds mean-spirited to say this now, but I, especially as the show went really well and the fans had a good time, and and I was pleased with how it had gone. But the thing was that I hadn't wanted to play that show at all. I had felt that it was the wrong way to bring Dubstar back to a wider audience. What I would have preferred was basically to have done a bigger venue, to have done a bigger show, all that kind of thing. And I would have done it after having released some music. So it would have been a big relaunch of the band. The idea would be to take Dubstar and position the act for the 21st century and take it forward to grow an audience, maybe, attract new people to the act. What I realized pretty much the second that I got on stage was that was almost certainly going to be impossible. There were defined parameters of what Dubstar could be, and in the end, Dubstar would always be defined by the activity that we'd had from the 90s, and that's fine. That's nice. And there's lots of people, lots of acts who reform and go out there and do their hits from the 90s. They become essentially their own tribute act. That's not what I wanted to do, and that's not what I wanted Dubstar to be. And so it just sort of occurred to me, like not in a flash, but it was standing on stage with my bass guitar, looking out and realizing, I think in a way, that I had been kind of kidding myself that this act could be taken somewhere new. So there was a sort of big crushing feeling of disappointment on me. And again, I do realize that it sounds almost in some ways kind of ungrateful for a musician or performer to be saying this stuff, expressing this stuff, especially now, 10 years on. It's just it's just that I think that if I was going to be in a room with the people who came to that show, including you, Michael, that I would have preferred to have done something bigger, better, different, something that would have pointed forward as opposed to pointing back. And I do appreciate that makes me sound a bit pretentious and makes me sound kind of artistic and maybe a bit of a diva and that kind of thing. But I can't be in a 90s tribute act. Do you know what I mean? Or actually, to be more specific, I can't be in can't recreate what we did 30 years ago. It on a deep personal level for me, it feels wrong, I know the people those songs are about. I know the situations those songs are about. And out of respect to me and those people, and maybe Chris and Sarah and our audience, the thought of going up on stage and attempting to be that person again 30 years on, no, I simply can't do it. What I'd rather do, though, and this might seem a little bit perverse, is to go out and play a 90s DJ set, and we could have a party about it, or to discuss the 90s, because there are things to explore. And of course, this is an exploration of work that's been done in the past. But when it comes to the raw art, thanks for the question. Hey everyone, I've decided to stop the video here. I think that's a good point. There were several other questions that I answered, but this video would have just gone on and on and on. So I'm going to save them for another instalment. I must thank all of you who have been in touch, asking questions. And now I'm getting questions that are sort of broader, not just focused on Dubstar, which is great, lovely, really. I'm very happy to answer them as well. But for now, thanks very much, and I'll see you all soon. And more music next month.